In version 6.2 of the Battle Cats, Ponos added a new event stage, which was very much different from the others. The Heavenly Tower, which was a 30-stage map with very unique stages compared to many of the others in the game. Monthly event stage bosses, Special Cat Awakening bosses, and Cyclone bosses were all strange additions to the floors of the Heavenly Tower. But at the very top, through lots of remakes and downright weird stages, was Floor 30. A stage unlike anything seen in the game before. A stage that was so brutally hard that it was widely agreed to be the hardest stage in the game on release. Soon, the stage was solved by experienced Battle Cats guide makers, such as Nurse Woofa, who had to both upgrade one of his cats, Swimmer, to a rather high level compared to what he normally uses to beat stages, and in his video description stated in the first line, "Do not attempt this." As time went on, Floor 30 became less difficult. For every update with new cats, true forms, and mechanics, the stage got just a little bit easier. Nowadays, you hardly hear anyone struggle with Floor 30 due to the increased number of wave immune units, anti-traitless units, and just more units that can do something to help you clear the stage. But one thing has stayed the same after all these years. Floor 30 is a fun stage. Widely agreed by the community to be one of the most fun stages in the game, it could be considered one of the best stages ever made in the game. But why is it? Why is this simple stage, with only one boss enemy and 3 types of peon enemies, one of the most fun experiences in the Battle Cats? Why did it used to be one of the hardest stages in the game? Why was it so different from any other stage at the time? To answer these questions, we will have to look at the intricacies of stage design. We will also answer the bigger question in the name of this video. What makes a good stage in the Battle Cats? There's a handful of things people could use to define a good stage. Personally, I found 3 main things that describe what a well-designed stage is, at least to me. But first, let's look at what a more common and likely response is. If the stage is fun, doesn't require high-level units, doesn't require select Ubers, and isn't too hard, it's a good stage. Likewise, some could tell you that stages with too much RNG, require super high-leveled units, or have annoying enemies could be considered bad stages. Now, while I don't entirely disagree with some of these points, I wouldn't call them the best way to describe what a good or bad stage is. Let's talk about fun stages. Sure, a stage being fun is good, but what exactly makes a stage fun? This tends to be pretty subjective, as there are a lot of types of strategies used to beat different stages. There can even be different strategies for the same stage. An example here is the stage from Subchapter 38, Cutpurse Coast, Stage 2, Seabreeze Salon. Do you prefer to stack high DPS units and deal loads of damage needed to melt the boss and supporting enemies? Or do you prefer to use multiple crowd control units to subdue the enemies by slowing, freezing, or knocking them back to the point where they can't do anything but helplessly sit back as you easily defeat them? Now, this might not be the most concrete example, as both will get the job just fine, but there are many other stages in the game where only one of these strategies will work and the other will not, and those two are just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the many types of strategies used. Using long-ranged units while meat shielding a lot, using rusher units to beat a stage before certain enemies spawn, using tanky units to damage high-range or wave enemies, and many more strategies all exist and will work on some stages and not on others. Stages are designed this way and end up forcing out a response for strategies that do work, and it could be one archetype that you might like using while someone else might not like using. Because of this, it's hard to determine exactly what makes a fun stage. So let's take another angle of approach. What makes a boring stage? This one is a bit easier to answer. Stages that are dull and tedious are not fun. Stages with lots of RNG involved are not fun, and stages that are too long for what experience they provide are not fun. We can simplify this into just one word. The first of the three main ideas of stage design: a stage is boring if it is not interactive. Of course, when you play a stage, unless it's a farming stage or just some annoying side task, you want to play an actual stage. You wouldn't want to just play something where you brainlessly spam everything from a random lineup and then just win, because at that point, what was even the purpose of that stage? Was it just there to waste your time? To eat up energy for no reason? Additionally, stages with a lot of luck involved aren't too fun, simply because we aren't in direct control of what happens. Being in control and doing something to affect the outcome of the battle is what we would prefer a lot of the time than leaving it up to whatever random number the game happens to pull. Most long stages aren't too fun either, not inherently because they are long, but because most of them aren't a very interactive experience. They tend to just be meat shield spamming and waiting for the occasional opportunity to do some damage, and then going back to waiting. Movies are long, but good movies aren't boring because they create a good story with lots of plot development that keeps you busy watching. An example of a stage that is boring, both to play and in terms of design, is Uncanny Legends Subchapter 12, Depths of My Heart, Stage 2, Cave Maidens. This stage consists of alien enemies with some Shibalian elites at the start. After hitting the base, you are greeted with a total of 4 Scissoroos that spawn in a bit, and 4 General Gregorys that spawn over time. Considering how this stage comes in Uncanny Legends, this is far from threatening, and really does nothing to keep you interested. You will deploy your usual attackers, easily kill these few alien enemies, and continue on your way. Without anything notable at all, Cave Maidens just feels like a waste of your time, and is just an uninteractive stage. Now, an example of a stage that is more on the interactive side would be Subchapter 48, The Legend Ends, Stage 5, False Resurrection. False Resurrection features many of the LD enemies with crowd control effects in the game, like Mr. Mole with knockback, Henry with freeze, Crockley with slow, and Dolphino with just some damage. Of course, since these are LD enemies, they need some sort of a normal pusher to put on pressure, which in this case is the occasional Lil Bun Bun. Assassin Bear also appears on the stage, but not in an overbearing or meaningless wave, where he comes to make sure you haven't pushed too hard before all the enemies in the stage have spawned, which, by the way, spawn gradually to prevent you from being overwhelmed initially. There's also a Doge base to prevent you from doing this, but can be wave blocked to make it less of a threat later on. To deal with these challenges, players will use lots of fast rusher units to make it into the blind spot of LD enemies and damage them, while pushing slowly against them. Most of the enemies here are white, so using crowd control units is limited. It mostly comes down to timing, which makes it pretty interactive and quite fun sometimes. Although it isn't perfect, False Resurrection is, in my opinion, a pretty good stage. Interactivity isn't the entirety of what makes a stage good, however. Part of what allows a stage to be interactive is difficulty, which brings us to my second criteria for a good stage. A good stage has a difficult but balanced challenge. So what do I mean by balanced? As your units get stronger, and you get access to more of them, stages will have stronger enemies and more types of them. It is obvious that a late game stage, such as a late Uncanny Legends stage, would have more powerful enemies than an early game, thus requiring higher level cat units, so the sense of difficulty for a good stage should be relative to progression. Stages like Tiny Creeper would obviously be harder than stages like Empire of Cats Chapter 3 Moon in a vacuum, but relative to where you are in the game, from what units you have to how much experience you have, Moon 3 may prove to be the bigger challenge. I also think that going a little over the usual difficulty for stages now and then is a good idea. An example of a stage that goes a bit over the normal difficulty, and as a result is a pretty good stage in my opinion, is Subchapter 38, Cutpurse Coast, Stage 6, No Return Flights. This stage was the bane of every player's existence and is probably one of the hardest stages in SOL, at least being the hardest stage up until that point. The stage features some pretty annoying enemies. Reindeers that do big damage, have decent range, and are hard to kill, an anteater at the back that prevents you from easily stacking up mid-rangers and ranged units, the dolphins, which are new enemies first introduced in this level, have long-distance attacks that use your meat shields to hit your ranged attackers. All combined for a pretty devastating combo. It can be painful to deal with. If you don't know how to play it correctly, it can even seem near impossible. But as you learn more about how the stage works, you can improve your strategy. Some small optimizations can go a long way, such as stacking attackers on the otters that appear before the boss wave, or sending in Bahamut when the otter waves are up so that he doesn't die to the high damage reindeers, are small changes in your game plan that have big results. The stage is balanced around having some level 35 units, give or take, which are a bit higher than the usual standard at the time, and it happens to be a challenge that is above average in difficulty, while also not being too hard for the current progression. Well, at least that's how it was back then. Now I wouldn't say a stage has to be hard in order for it to be good. Another good example of this is Subchapter 48, The Legend Ends, Stage 7, Twilight Zephyr. Twilight Zephyr is an easy stage. It also happens to be a boss rush, where you get to take on enemies one by one from your journey across the stories of legends, and is a pretty cool penultimate stage. Twilight Zephyr has you build a lineup to accommodate these enemies, making smart choices in building by bringing some units that can help deal with multiple threats, like Octopus Cat for blocking waves, chipping down ranged enemies, and stalling the Bun Bun at the end, and Thaumaturge for weakening the R-Ost, Borophim, Boar, and Shy Boy. People normally don't have much trouble with Twilight Zephyr, but people can still call it a pretty good stage regardless. It isn't too easy to the point where you can just turn your brain off, but it isn't that hard, and still manages to be worth your time. Finally, we reached the last of the 3 points of stage design. This one probably being the easiest to understand out of all the other ones. A good stage is, well, unique. It will be different from other stages, more memorable than them, and usually have more replay value than them. Replay value seems to be something overlooked when judging stages in Battle Cats. Sure, most of the stages in the game only need to be cleared once, but a lot of them should be cleared more than once. The Heavenly Tower forces you to clear its stages multiple times to reclaim the rewards from it. Stories of Legend stages and Uncanny Legend stages have multiple star difficulties that you need to clear for bonus rewards at the end. Farming stages for cat fruit, behemoth stones, and more need to be rebeaten for you to gather materials that you need. And even since the beginning, you would have to replay main chapter stages to grind them for treasures. So replayability happens to be something pretty important for stages, and being an interesting and original stage makes them less tedious to replay. Would you rather play the same usual boring stage another time, or a stage you thought was pretty cool and gave you a different experience from the norm another time, and maybe see what you could optimize or what other strategies you could use? To the casual player, not many stages are too memorable. Usually it tends to be whichever hard stage they get stuck on rather than good stages that they think are interesting. But to some more seasoned players such as myself and experienced players or guide makers, we like to see stages that are interesting to play or have interesting strategies used to beat them. An example of a stage that at least I found interesting was Subchapter 36, Mausyland, Stage 6, The Haunted One LDK. It starts off as a normal zombie stage, with some low-range enemies and a Lord Gravy as a powerful but not too hard-pushing enemy. After a small period of time, the boss, Miss Haka, comes out. The combination of Miss Haka and Lord Gravy is a pretty cool one, as they are both tombstone-like enemies and create dynamic gameplay. Lord Gravy is a pretty sturdy enemy which you can stack ranged attackers on and have no problem stalling by himself. However, when Miss Haka is added to the picture, spamming meat shields allows her to burrow and bypass your units to reach your base, where she will proceed to destroy it. So what can you do? Miss Haka is relatively easy to knock back, so if you bring ranged wave and LD units, you can damage Miss Haka enough to get her to knock back when she is about to burrow. You can also use slow meat shields to prevent them from reaching Haka, which would otherwise trigger her burrow. And on the occasion that Haka does burrow, you can bring some fast burst damage units like Maglev and Fishman Cat to knock her back in front of your ranged attackers and then back again to behind Lord Gravy. The Haunt and Wet on Decay, in my opinion, is a pretty cool stage. It was memorable to me when I played it, and might not have been when you played it or will be in the future, but I'd rather have stages that promote interesting strategies than ones that are like every other unremarkable stage in the game. And I don't mean that every original stage is good. Stories of Legends Subchapter 42, Grotesque Gallery, is filled with very different stages, except they are all pretty stupid gimmick stages that aren't really worth thinking about. Whether it's overbuffed enemy spam, some enemies intended as an instant loss that spawn if you take too long to fight some other boring enemies, or just straight up built-in miss-sign cheese in a level, these stages are definitely original and kind of interesting, but not really anywhere close to what I would call too good of a stage. Gimmick stages in general are not my cup of tea, so this aspect is definitely not the end-all, be-all of judging stage quality. Now, I've explained to you my criteria on what makes a good stage, and it's almost time to dissect Floor 30, but for fun, I've decided to let you know what I think is the worst stage in all of the Battle Cats. You might be able to guess it, but you most likely won't. But let's go over some dishonorable mentions first. So most gimmick stages aren't gonna be here because it's generally too hard to choose one over the other on how stupid they are. One in particular that does get to be highlighted is Tear-Soaked Puppy, which is a remake of Cubist Crimes, except with Lil Doge Dodge RNG. How fun does that sound? March to Death might seem like a pretty RNG heavy stage, but you can actually do a lot on your own side to increase your odds of winning, so I wouldn't actually call it a bad stage. Some Legend unit boss fights like Mechabun Urs and Godcat can be pretty underwhelming and disappointing, but at least they have character going for them. Those are all very recognizable stages and aren't completely the bottom of the barrel. A stage that I despise personally, Subchapter 33 Axis of Evil, Stage 4 Celestial Seas, is a pretty annoying stage, but I wouldn't call it the worst stage ever, as it is still experimenting with what a Star Ocean type stage would look like with a long-range backliner as the boss. N1 Grand Prix is a god-awful stage in what it requires from you, but at least the theming makes sense. It's Ubers only to match the royalty that is King Wawa, and you also get normals because Ubers only would make the stage way too hard. With that out of the way, here's the worst stage in the entire game. Uncanny Legends, Subchapter 42, Rose-Colored Road, Stage 3, Ashes Just Ahead. This stage is a complete and utter joke in terms of stage design. So let's look at it. 2 enemies. There are only 2 enemies in the stage, except one of them is Assassin Bear. This Assassin Bear spawns after 80 seconds, with a delay from 80 to 83.3 seconds, so it's really just a cat cannon check. So the stage might as well just have 1 enemy. Well, which enemy is it? Of course, it's Red Energy. Red Energy is spammed to oblivion, and there's not much you can do. Guaranteed knockback every hit in a surge means there isn't much that can actually end up hitting them when they are spammed as much as they are in this stage. So how do you beat the stage? Well, it's simple really. Spam meat shields and spawn cyberpunks. He outranges their surge and slows them. Sniper the Heavy and Lil Nandom can also help do damage to them, as well as Doron for the occasional chip, But look at what we have to deal with. There are tons of red energies, and we are stuck with low DPS super backliners and like one decently long cooldown chipper unit. This stage takes forever to beat. And it's not like you can do much during the battle. It really is just waiting to the extreme. For most of the fight, it's only red energy at the front making knockback surges and slowly getting chipped down, only for more red energies to spawn after some die. You'll see the occasional assassin bear now and then, but that doesn't really change anything as you will just cannon him and he goes down in 2 seconds. Beating this stage normally takes ages to do and is nowhere near the realm of fun. The only challenge this stage provides is trying not to fall asleep while playing it. Yeah, you could call it original in the sense that there's no stage already like this, but come on, it's literally only red energy spam. This is the most uncreative stage possible. When I asked one of my friends what he doesn't like about some Battlecat stages, he said he doesn't like stages that can be cheesed. Well, guess what? Ashes Just Ahead is cheesable. And it's really easy to do as well. Just stall the first red energy with rocks and Gato Amigos, and then use Cat God's Omni Strike range from the base to knock them all back and take out the base. I'd even recommend you to do this so you don't have to linger for a whole 17 minutes of literally nothing. Could you even call this cheese? There is no boss in the level and you've already seen every enemy in the stage. This stage fails in so many ways of being a good stage that it is mind-boggling. Other stages you can at least think of some positives, but Ashes Just Ahead has absolutely none. It's complete garbage in every sense. Even the cheese itself isn't satisfying because it's just stalling with Cat God, so there is no way to enjoy this horrendous stage. You want to use Ubers? Well, better hope they have surge immunity and above 370 range or are super backliners, and even then it will suck to do. Yeah, Ashes Just Ahead? I think a more fitting name would be Trash is Just Ahead. Well, it's about time we've stopped talking about bad stages, and time to start explaining what you've all been waiting for since the start of the video. Why is Floor 30 an absolutely amazing stage? Let's examine it using the system we've created to judge stages. Interactivity. Floor 30 may be the most interactive stage in the game. Every unit you spawn has both a meaning in when you use it in a macro sense, and when you time its spawn in a micro sense. There's a lot of niche interactions that can be useful to beat the stage, but aren't too hard to learn. Floor 30 even allows you to use a wide variety of units to beat the stage. Units like Fishman and even Kitty of Liberty are picks you might not have expected to see on stages without floatings or barriers, but they are both usable and good here. You can bring more anti-wave units, more units that help you get good Bahamut chains, units that help out the performance of your other units, or simply more units that are meant to deal with the peons of the stage. The stage also allows you to express your playstyle in how you beat the stage. Attack up combos, and constant chip with your units to kill Hermit as fast as possible, or more defensive options to handle peon waves in a safer lineup to help you survive longer in the stage. The choice is yours. Even with tons of power creep now, they don't make the stage less fun. They actually just make the stage more accessible to players with different units. Most Ubers used here won't break the stage completely, but will just help you a lot while having you still have fun dealing with these peon waves. Difficulty. While Floor 30 might not be the hardest stage anymore, it certainly was back then. What made Floor 30 so hard back then was two things: a lack of anti-wave units, and a lack of other stages that played similarly, meaning that even experienced Battlecats players would have no idea how to tackle this challenge. Hermit Cat, the boss, had the 3-hit multi-attack that did 22,000 damage every single hit, and caused a guaranteed wave attack. It would most certainly wipe out anything that wasn't wave immune with ease. The supporting peons help him push you to your base, and you are in charge of dealing with wave after wave of these reinforcements until Hermit eventually dies. This was especially hard to approach back then, with a lot less options to use on the stage, and a lot more precision in your timing for deploying units. Nowadays, if you still feel like you want a challenge, you could try to beat the stage when you are pretty early in the game, or you could wait until you are comfortable with the challenge the stage provides you and you have more options. This applies to every stage, of course, but with floor 30, there really isn't a moment where you can get a unit and the stage becomes an absolute joke. Certain units can help a lot, yes, but you actually get to play floor 30 when you beat it. I think that right now in modern times, the stage is a well-balanced challenge for most casual players to enjoy, while it's still being an engaging stage for veterans to play. Even as the stage gets easier, it still plays the same way. Anti-wave units in the back, dealing damage to Hermit over time, and taking down peon waves with reinforcements. From an early game playthrough where you just got Musashi, or a late game replay where you now have his true form, talented dancer, and a whole lot of other wave immune units, the stage is still a cool experience. Floor 30 is the definition of easy to learn, hard to master, as the challenge presented to you is simple, but dealing with it is very dynamic as well as your approach. When stages are hard, usually it tends to be because you lack certain cat units to beat the stage. These usually end up being very roadblocky and forces you to stop progressing just to farm up a unit unlock. Floor 30, as long as you have gotten Musashi or some anti-wave units, really allows you to try it whenever you want. This stage is always possible at the point where you get some types of units in the mid-game, but is very hard until you get more options. You can compensate for difficulty in a weaker lineup with a stronger performance, by deploying units at better times, knowing more interactions, and just making less mistakes. And that balance between the two aspects of difficulty, both with the lineup and the gameplay, is the peak of what makes a well-balanced challenge. Originality. Floor 30 on release was a stage that we've never seen before. We've had wave enemies in the past, with Corey, Dober, Elizabeth, Berserkori, Toucan, and more, but none of them played like Hermit does. Hermit's design as an enemy makes him an excellent boss, in the fact that while he can apply tremendous amounts of pressure, he cannot push you by himself. The result of this is that in between peon waves, you get time to breathe and think about how you are going to deal with the situation. The peon waves themselves consist of trolley bloggers, doge darks, and ginger snages, which are all pretty standard choices, and are all at high enough magnifications that dealing with them normally isn't a problem at all, but with Hermit creating waves, it becomes much more challenging. These peons don't make the fight worse, but enhance it instead, by a lot. Now we get moments where we have to act and kill the sporting enemies, while not being overwhelmed to the player. Even between more intense moments, such as having multiple peons on the field at once, and the calmer times where you just stall Hermit and maybe have a blogger push back Musashi, you're still spawning your stalling meat shield on Hermit at a precise rhythm. It's not brain dead, you still have to time this unit, which is a very nice change of pace from spamming multiple meat shields to normally defend versus enemies. Floor 30 is a very memorable stage in how it plays differently from almost every other stage in the game, and not in a bad way like some others. It's an experience that even casual players who don't think much about stages can end up enjoying and remembering, which is very cool to see. And with all of that done, I've finished explaining both good stage design and why Floor 30 is a great example of it. Thank you for watching this far into the video, as this one took a lot of effort to make. Have a good day, my fellow Battle Cats players, and I'll see you in a later video, hopefully.